It's the week ending Saturday, the 7th of August, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Belarusian sprinter Kristina Timanovskaya given a humanitarian visa by Poland, hundreds of firefighters battling to contain Turkey's wildfires, and British skateboarder Sky Brown becoming TGB's youngest Olympic medalist ever at just 13 years old. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Ollie Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team is Kate Samuelson, and joining her, the one-woman digital team who is freelancer Sachandrika Chakrabarti, and the man who shuns all teamwork as it helps preserve his aura of mystery. It's science correspondent for The Economist, Alok Jha. Sachandrika, you are kicking us off this week. What do you think it should be remembered for?
The Olympic love-hate relationship with social media.
Suni Lee told reporters after the women's uneven bars final that she planned on staying off social media for a bit, adding she would probably temporarily delete Twitter while preparing for the beam final. It's easy to understand why it might be distracting, as social media posts about Suni have skyrocketed since she became the all-around gymnastics champion at the Tokyo Olympics.
Heidi Wigdal reporting for Care 11 News on Tuesday. Sachandrika, what's the story?
US Olympic gymnast Suni Lee has blamed social media for her bronze medal on the uneven bars. People thought that she would win gold. Now, she's blamed social media. She says, now I think I'll stay off social media for a little bit. She plans to delete Twitter because it's just so easy to see everything that everyone is saying about her in the world. But having said that, she might not delete Instagram, and she'll definitely keep TikTok because TikTok is my getaway app. It's just so much fun. And she's already posted videos following her medal wins on there.
Okay, but when you say she blames Twitter, I mean, that's a simplification. Surely she's not really saying, is she, that having looked at social media is to blame for her not achieving the gold?
It's interesting that she differentiates between Twitter and TikTok. It sounds as though with Twitter, she's getting to hear what everyone says about her, kind of like behind her back, or as though she wasn't in the room. And with TikTok, she gets to kind of show off her sense of humour. Her last video is having a dance off with a friend at the Olympic Village. And so she gets to just have a bit of a laugh and show off who she is. With Twitter, it seems like it's hard to know how professional to be, especially when, you know, her followers have shot up since she's become famous due to the Olympics. And it's hard to know for her, I suppose, who to respond to. And she gets a lot of hate, I suppose, because the moderation on Twitter has been an issue for a long time.
Okay. I mean, Alok, we know that our minds are turning to mush thanks to social media and it's affecting our ability to concentrate. But if you're an Olympic athlete, then the ability to concentrate is one of the most important things in your toolbox, isn't it? So surely you should be able to resist Twitter.
There's some good evidence to show that even elite sports stars can be affected by the things going on sort of between training. So, you know, NBA basketballers and others who have done Facebook posts or been interactive on Facebook the night before games, they tend to score less. And these are associations. We don't know exactly what their relationships are. We know that, you know, if you get sucked into the endless doom scrolling of any social media whatsoever, you can sort of spend a lot of time doing that rather than resting or eating properly, all these other things. These are all physical changes. And yes, of course, mental training is an incredibly important part of what elite sports stars do. And actually, I think that Suni Lee's interpretation of all this and what she's doing, it is what elite sports stars should be doing. They look after their mental health, and one way of looking after your mental health is to actively take yourself out of a danger area, as several other Olympics stars have done recently.
Yeah, but Kate, I suppose if you've seen The Social Dilemma, which was the moment everyone was talking about this last year, wasn't it, when that came on Netflix? I realised the irony in highlighting a film that is basically available through an on-demand service when we're talking about addiction to things. But if you've seen that, it's kind of about, well, turn off your notifications, because the designers of all of these apps are saying there's teams of people and psychologists and engineers who have worked behind the scenes to addict you to your devices. You need to turn off your notifications. That's what everyone needs to do. And yet, like I say, years gone by since that film came out, and I mean, most of us still have our notifications turned on. It's a wider conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think turning off your notifications is easier said than done. And if we're thinking about these Olympic athletes, what they're going through right now is extraordinary, obviously, in terms of the Olympics, but in terms of the social media following that they're gaining throughout the Olympics too, they're going from having relatively small profiles to suddenly having, in the millions, which is pretty extraordinary for people to deal with. And studies have shown that it can be a lot of pressure for people to suddenly have to deal with the demands of having a bigger following. I think it was a psychotherapist who told Bustle that a large following means you have more eyes watching you, more eyes viewing your account. That can create symptoms of anxiety around wanting to keep that status, posting content that your audience enjoys, and becoming too invested in your account's engagement. So with bigger followings comes this bigger responsibility, and that's something that these Olympic athletes are dealing with on top of the competition that they're there for.
So, Suchandrika, why is this your story of the week? I mean, is it for you about what Olympic trainers need to do in the future, or the Olympic committees even, to ensure that athletes are protected from this? Or is it wider than that and it's about Olympians, as is so often the case, kind of being role models and people starting a conversation?
So Suni Lee has gained 950,000 followers, a 390% increase due to the Olympics. It's a bit like when people go on Love Island. They're under that kind of pressure. But often the people at the Olympics are younger and they've often had very sheltered lives. They might not have had any kind of following beforehand. And overnight it suddenly grows. And as Kate mentioned, there are eyes on them at all times. And from what I've seen of people with really big followings on social media, you have to then be really careful with how you curate your account, because say you retweet someone with 200 followers, you can encourage a pile-on onto that smaller account, which nobody aimed to do, but it just happens. So you've got to start then managing your own account. So I think the athletes are going to start needing social media managers, maybe people to make sure they've got someone to talk to who isn't their social media account. So, for instance, late at night, if they are worried about their performance or if they've got other concerns, that they're looking after their mental health and they're not doing that on a public forum, which is very tempting. So I think in the future, we're looking at managing and curating these profiles and making sure the Olympians are kept safe from the kind of worst trolls.
It's so interesting, isn't it, Alec, that even at this level, Olympians, they look to ordinary people bashing out messages on their phones to get some worth, some value on what they've just achieved. I mean, it's something I think we can all relate to if we've ever done anything public. If I'm interviewed on the telly or the radio, I will look at my social media and see what people thought of it. And I know that's only a tiny proportion of the audience, but you'd think if you've just won a medal, that's the validation you need. What does it matter what everyone thinks?
Well, and of course, Olympians are still human beings, right? And they're young human beings. And normally in the Olympics, you'd have lots of cheering crowds, tens of thousands of people to give you a sense of worth. If you get a medal or even, do just really well, you've got lots of people cheering you on. There's no crowds. There's no cheering fans in these stadiums that they're performing in Tokyo. So social media is kind of like perhaps a backup for that. So you look for energy from this sort of adoration there. And of course, it's much easier then to get the negative stuff. But I think it's also interesting about the conversations we've been having in the past week about mental health in elite athletes. Simone Biles, of course, being the superstar gymnast, has taken time out from her competitions in the Olympics. Olympians, elite athletes, they're seen as these almost godlike figures that train obsessively, do wonderful things, and they're perfect human beings. That what's the motto of the Olympics? Fitter, higher, faster. These are the epitome of human beings. And therefore, we don't really talk about their mental health. We just assume them to be perfect. Now, I think it's really good that Simone Biles, that Suni Lee, people like that have said, look, I want to look after my mental health just as I look after my physical health. And I need to sort of step back from this most amazing thing that's happening to me right now. Because also it means that people who are not perfect, like me and many others, can just say, actually, you know what? Mental health is an important thing to think about. And look, even the most elite people need to think about this. And so it's okay for me to do it as well. This is a good conversation.
But is there a danger that there's a generational divide, Kate, between the people we're talking about who are battling this stuff and the people who are in charge of organising the Olympics? I mean, most of those guys are probably in their 40s and 50s, and most of the people who are competing are, well, I mentioned Sky Brown in the intro, 13, but I mean, you talk about teenagers, people in their early 20s. They're from different backgrounds. They've got a different relationship with social media.
Yeah, there definitely is a generational divide, but I think mental health is an issue that affects people of every generation. So the psychologists on the Olympic team should be able to support the players with their mental health, regardless of whether that's linked to social media or not. And I think it's worth adding that part of the reason why younger people prefer TikTok is because they're able to really have fun on that platform. They're able to kind of show this more human side to them. I personally, I'm not a Gen X, I'm a millennial, so I'm not a big TikTok user, but I have been on it and I have seen these behind the scenes tours of the athletes' village and day in the life of vlogs, and they really offer this unique perspective and they help athletes kind of normalize themselves. They help them connect with their fans. Videos show them dancing and kind of mucking around with friends. And it really probably is a good way of letting them let off steam. Perhaps we don't quite get that because we're not doing that ourselves. But I think probably it is important for athletes' mental health too, as well as being, dangerous in other ways.
Ollie, can I just take issue with one thing you said? You talked about these athletes battling against issues with their mental health. I don't think they're battling with anything. I think that they're taking control of their mental health. They see a potential problem about to happen, or that they're feeling these signs of something that could lead to something that could put them out of control, and they're taking control of it. Simone Biles and Suni Lee have issued the most controlled and well sort of managed statements saying, look, I'm just going to step back from this for a moment. What matters to me is that I just want to be healthy and I'm going to do this. And I think it's a really empowering way of dealing with this issue.
Yes, and, previously, Suchandrika, the competitors were reliant on their nations to essentially represent them to the press, as well as them representing their nations on the podium. But now, with social media profiles, they can actually say what they really think. I mean, that is obviously hugely valuable.
Yeah, so I suppose with the advent of broadcast media, they were subject to a lot of pressure, a lot of people watching them. They could know what the figures were. They could hear what the journalists were saying about them, but they couldn't speak their minds. And now they have this direct channel to fans and they can say what they're feeling. At the same time, though, they have the channel back from the fans and from people who aren't fans, people who just want to get their say in. And so they have to hear everything back. And I think that is just the essential problem with social media and with the internet, that we haven't worked out how to deal with kind of all the world wanting to make a noise. When they choose which platform to be on, which does seem to be more towards the visual form, so more like an Instagram or a TikTok, then they seem to be a lot happier playing around and having fun. But when it's a Twitter, which is a much more verbal medium, a much more kind of combative medium, then that doesn't seem to work out for the Olympians as much. So I think they're working out for themselves as well. And this generation seems to be really good at policing their own responses to how social media makes them feel, which I think is amazing. So I don't think I would have been the same at that age.
I mean, your use of the word have to is interesting, though, isn't it? I mean, looking at what people were tweeting Suni Lee, there were a lot of people saying, wow, you're going to get loads of endorsements now. Your phone's going to blow up with people wanting product placement with you as an influencer. That's a commercial thing. You don't have to do that. She doesn't have to become the face of a brand, does she? She could choose not to do that. And you wonder how much the influence of corporate money is actually forcing some of these athletes onto social media when they don't have to.
Well, obviously, I think it's really important to note that for some athletes, particularly ones from poorer countries, actually social media could be a real deal breaker in terms of actually getting them to the Olympics, as well as all the kind of commercial benefits that can come from them having a big profile in the kind of months or even years between big competitive events that they're taking part in. There was a Filipino weightlifter who was only able to go and compete in the Tokyo Olympics after she posted an Instagram story in 2019 asking for financial support. So as much as we like to criticize these platforms because of the kind of abuse that gets hurled at players, in some ways they can also be make or break for others in terms of helping them fundraise, reach people with their stories and motivate people to get them there to compete in the first place. So they're actually really powerful tools at the same time.
Final point on this, Chandrika, do you think maybe the onus should be on the social media companies to roll out versions of their apps for people that are in the public eye and people that are so dramatically and suddenly in the public eye? I mean, Twitter has the verified blue tick thing. I've got a blue tick. If I want to, it means I can only see @replies from other people with blue ticks, for example. Could they make that even more developed so that if you are one of these people, there's a version of their app that doesn't prioritise people saying controversial things about you until you're ready to see it.
Yeah, it does feel like they should. As you mentioned with the blue tick, when you get one of those, you get a different inbox and you get all of these extra added benefits. So I think that tech companies have to understand that aside from being publishers, which they are, they have a part to play in the mental health of their biggest users, because when someone has 1 million followers, they become an advocate for Twitter or Instagram or TikTok. Those platforms need to look after those people as well, because great responsibility comes with that many followers.
And just to jump in, I think that some of the networks have been taking measures to help protect athletes this year. I read in a really interesting Bloomberg report, which was about the impact of social media on athletes' mental health, that Facebook actually launched a private Instagram support account for athletes on the lead up to the games. And these special accounts have a hidden word feature, which automatically filters out words and phrases and emojis that might be offensive or abusive to the athletes.
Okay, do let us know what you think by writing me a letter in the post and sending it in a pastel-coloured envelope. No rush to open. Kate, you're up next after this. Okay, Kate, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
A growing backlash towards secretive salaries.
Posting the wage and salary compensation and having pay transparency is fundamentally a gender justice issue, but it is also one of racial justice. So what pay transparency would do is sheds light on how much people make, and it forces organizations to move towards a principle of equal pay for equal work. So at FoodShare, we have a standard pay grid for all positions, all pay bands. It's public. It's on our website. Every employee knows what every position makes, and all staff who do the same job get the same pay, the same salary, the same compensation, the same benefits and wages when they are taking on the same level of risk and responsibility by doing the same work.
Katie German, Programmes Director at Toronto non-profit FoodShare, talking to the YouTube channel Real Talk Ryan Jesperson. Kate, what is the story?
So I was inspired to pitch this story for the podcast because I read a really interesting article in The Atlantic a few days ago, which found that some big US companies like Nike and Airbnb have been advertising remote roles which are open to candidates anywhere but Colorado.
Anywhere in the world?
And anywhere in the US,
okay.
Except the state of Colorado.
Right.
And the reason for that is that in 2019, Colorado passed a really progressive labor law, which went into effect earlier this year, that requires all companies in the state to include salary details in job postings with the aim of reducing or ending the gender and ethnicity pay gaps. But instead of stating the salary, a lot of these huge big name employers are actually just choosing to exclude Colorado candidates rather than be more transparent in their job descriptions.
Wow. So in an attempt to try and make everyone in Colorado equal, the state of Colorado has actually made their citizens the only people who can't apply for jobs at all.
Yeah.
Whoever they are.
The Atlantic said that what was supposed to be a really transformative step towards gender equality is running into corporate America's very best evasion tactics.
Indeed. Although those evasion tactics are surely temporary, aren't they, if other states catch on and start passing similar laws? The likes of these big corporations can't just keep excluding every state in America who's got a progressive law on pay.
That's what the hope would be, that other states would do the same. But I don't think it's looking that way at the moment. And even in the UK, where we've got the Equal Pay Act that actually was given royal assent in 1970. So it's pretty old, and it was updated in 2010, saying that men and women in the same employment performing equal work must receive equal pay. I mean, we've got these laws in place, but the gender pay gap still sits at around 17% in this country.
So that's the broader conversation, isn't it, Suchandrika? We have an Equal Pay Act, and yet because salaries aren't advertised with jobs, the suggestion is that even though it's illegal to discriminate against someone because of their gender or the colour of their skin when they apply for a job, perhaps that person is asking for a lower salary because they don't know what they could be getting. And that might be one of the reasons we see the disparity still.
Yeah, salary secrecy allows these kind of gaps to flourish, don't they? Because we don't know if we're being underpaid or overpaid for the same job. And also what you'll have as well is that women and people of ethnic minorities might have been paid less in their last job. And if you're basing your salary on their last job, then you're just helping those inequalities carry on into the next job too. So we have that secrecy around the career history and the career salaries that people have had as well.
It is just capitalism, though, isn't it, Alok? That companies will try to, for example, get consumers to pay the most for something, and that they will try and keep the costs as low as possible to produce the thing, because that's how you maximize profit. I mean, that's the system we have. The incentive is there for the company to pay as little as possible for the best employee.
Yeah, I mean, I feel a bit uncomfortable that I'm being asked to defend this position, but let's go for it. Let's just do it. Although I have to say I agree with the sentiments that Kate and Chandrika talk about. Of course, if you want equal pay, you need mechanisms to ensure that, which I think part of which is transparency. The flip side of that is, how do you go from where we are now, where people have negotiated things probably individually, sometimes with lots of power, if you're someone unique in your job and you've managed to negotiate a massive salary, or you're someone a junior level who's still not quite sure how to negotiate things.
Sometimes with representation, you might have an agent or a manager or a headhunter.
Well, exactly. All of these things are wrapped up in there. How do you go from that system where things are all over the place to one where all salaries are publicly known and in clear bands and things? I believe in some countries you can see everyone's tax returns. In some of the Scandinavian countries, everyone's tax returns are available, and that, I suppose, allows people to just research their roles and research things in terms of being able to negotiate properly. I think that, yes, having that information is good. I'm just curious about the transition period, about how do we do this without a lot of pain and heartache and sort of bad feeling amongst people. Now, I'm not suggesting that is necessarily, a bad thing, but I have questions around how to get to that point. But I have another question, which is, do you really think that it's possible to put pay bands into every single job and say, this is what this person gets paid after this many years? It doesn't allow for any creativity for managers to say, look, you're really, really good at what you're doing, and therefore you should be compensated. It means that people who are not very good can just get bumped up the year later. I mean, I hate to use the word Marxist, but it is a little bit Marxist, and I'm not a fan of that.
It's also difficult, Kate, isn't it, to poach someone from another business? There might be someone in a current role who's doing okay, but you think, we really want to accelerate our business at the moment. We can poach this person from this business, and they are getting paid twice as much, but they're worth it. You've then completely obliterated the salary band, but it's for that particular individual. So it's quite hard to put that into a metric.
Yeah, if you want to attract the best people, obviously you do have to provide the most competitive salaries, whether those salaries are secret or not. Employers are always going to make arguments against doing this, and there'll always be reasons why it will be difficult to put into practice, but the stats remain the same. Evidence shows that when employers stop asking for current or previous salaries, pay increases for Black candidates by as much as 13% and for women by 8%. You can't really argue against that as being a positive thing for the workforce.
And for freelancers, Sachandrika, and you always get introduced on this show as freelancer Sachandrika Chakrabarti, so as to indicate where you are in our myriad different categories of people who work for The Week magazine.
That I'm broke. Yeah,
would it be helpful for you? I mean, much more helpful than the current system, for you to know how to pitch yourself? Or is it that, I'm a freelancer too, when you have experience under your belt, when you know how to pitch yourself, actually, you're quite confident that what you're asking is the right price?
Oh, to have standardized rates for things would be amazing, because similar to you, I do so many different things. There are different kinds of rates for those things. There's corporate rates and charity rates. And then even when you get a sense of how to pitch yourself in terms of, I'm asking for this fee, fees don't seem to go up. For instance, pitching a piece to a newspaper or something like that, those fees haven't gone up in 20 years. If we then keep pitching ourselves at 2,000 rates, nothing then changes. So I think it's about some kind of freelancer union, really, isn't it? And there are steps towards that. There are spreadsheets that are being shared. There are lots of different kinds of people getting together in Slack groups and talking about this kind of thing. But essentially, it is completely wild. You can come up with any sort of figure, you lob it over to them, you wait around seeing if they go, how can they think they're worth this? Or that's fun, let's get two of her in. And you just have no idea. So that would be a lot better, because all the time we as freelancers spend pitching and negotiating is unpaid time. That can get really difficult.
Yeah, I think the time element is a really important part of this debate because, as you said, when you're pitching for work and you don't know what the rate is, that kind of thing can take a long time. But also when you're applying for full-time jobs, you might go through loads of interviews, loads of conversations, only to then find out that the salary is not something that you're prepared to take. I read in the FT that in the UK, on average, we spend 27 days in an interview process when applying for a job. That's unpaid time, and being able to know upfront whether this job is at the right level for you, it's a salary that you're happy with, those things would be really important, and they would save people time. Unpaid time.
It might, though, take away the opportunity for, I'm going to say younger people, it doesn't have to be, but typically it would be less experienced people, Alok, to say, well, I'd do that job for £5,000 less, employ me. If there's a salary band, the company might feel obliged to employ someone who fits within that salary band.
That's a difficult. I think that there's nothing wrong with salary bands saying, look, with this much experience, this is what we pay you. And the salary bands seem to be completely reasonable to me. And no one's going to say, employ me because I've got slightly less experience and I'll do it for less money. No one should be forced into that position. No one should ever do that. If you think you're good enough for the job, you should do it for the money that's advertised. All of this is just a classic market. And the thing about markets is information is money. Information is power. At the moment, the companies have all the information and they have all of the power, therefore. I think that, as the others have said, the way for others, the workers essentially to get power is to share information with each other. The National Union of Journalists, for example, in my profession in the UK, has websites full of all of the different rates for all the magazines and newspapers and things that people have just recently achieved, so you can then compare yourself. And they also have a website called Rate for the Job, which basically allows you, if you don't have any experience, just to go, this is what the NUJ rate is, and therefore can you pay me this much? And the person you're going for might disagree with that, but at least you started off with the backing of lots of other journalists who've done this sort of stuff. So it's about the confidence to do all those things. And I think that as in the training for younger people, having some negotiating skills is probably the way to making sure that you're not stiffed for the work you're doing. We can ask companies to be nice. That's just not going to happen because the market demands that they spend less money. So perhaps we do need laws that mean that the hiring practices that allow for blind recruitment, essentially, so you don't know who the what nationality or race or number of years experience. Certain newspapers I know do this. The Spectator, for example, doesn't look at CVs and it looks at a piece of writing. So there are all these other different ways of doing things. The story we're talking about here about the big corporates not allowing people to work from Colorado because Colorado's passed a law is just growing pains for those companies. They're going to have to deal with this at some point. And especially as other states in the US also enact laws like this, pay transparency. So I think that it's coming, it's going to happen, and they're going to have to stop that at some point very soon.
Do you think ultimately, Kate, this is where we're heading to? Show the salary is going to happen eventually, and it is just a case of waiting for, it's easy for startups to do it now, as Alok was saying, maybe harder for established companies to transition, but in 10, 20 years' time, those startups will be the establishment, so then it'll be sorted.
In my opinion, I can see why it poses a bit of a headache for employers, but I think there are a lot more positive reasons than negative ones to show the salary, from reducing the gender and ethnicity pay gap to breaking the cycle of underpaying people to helping people save time. Show the Salary is actually an amazing campaign in the UK that's raising awareness of the issue in the charity sector. At the moment, they're doing an incredible job calling out charities and also public companies. They use Twitter a lot to do that and helping companies change the way they advertise. And I think they were quite significant in getting some major jobs boards like Charity Jobs to make listing the salary mandatory. At the moment, it's still relatively unusual for a private company to list salaries, but change is coming. And I think this is a really good thing in terms of making the workplace fairer and more transparent.
Okay, Alok, I'm coming to you next after this. Alok, you're finishing the show. It is a science story, so strap in, everybody. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
the oldest, maddest plant in the world.
The interesting thing about Welwitschia is that the leaves seem to break the rules for what we would predict leaf sizes of plants in an environment like this to be. So there's quite a bit of work been done to predict the relationship between environment and leaf size. And one of the conclusions from that work is that if you have a plant that's in a hot, sunny environment, that plant should produce leaves that are small, numerous, and narrow. And here's Welwitschia. It breaks the rules.
J. Scott Turner, Professor of Biology at the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. That's one hell of a business card. Speaking there in an excerpt from Oliver Halsey's documentary Namib Surviving the Sand Sea. Alok, what is the news?
Well, so Welwitschia, which you heard about there, I mean, can I just point out to you, this is much more bizarre and interesting than they made it sound in that clip. It's a plant that grows in some of the most arid regions of the world, the Namib Desert, where there's like a couple of inches of rain every year. It looks like a cross between a very bad haircut and an angry, dry octopus. It only has 2 leaves, and because these 2 leaves are lashed by dry winds and chewed up by animals that are wandering by, they become shredded and curled, and so this bush is quite large, even though it's only got 2 leaves. And the most amazing thing is that these plants live for thousands of years, literally 2,000-3,000 years. They're some of the most oldest plants in the world. And just recently, scientists conducted the first genetic sequence to try and understand.
I'm going to ask again, Alok, what is the news?
I was just about to say, the scientists have just conducted the first genetic sequence, a full genetic sequence of the plant to try and understand how this thing survives.
But we don't have the answer yet.
They're trying to find clues as to what has allowed this thing to survive for so many millions of years, unchanged. And, normally things die within several decades, but this has been around for thousands of years. The ones in the Namib Desert right now, they've been around since before the Roman Empire, when the Iliad and the Odyssey were being written by Homer. And in the genes, they found a couple of interesting things. They found that at some point in the past few million years, there was a genetic mutation that meant that the entire genome of the plant doubled in size. It was an accident. Now, that allows the plant to do various things. I mean, first of all, having lots of genes, on the one hand, is not a good thing because it means that you have to reproduce a lot of molecules. And if there's no nutrition and water in your environment, that's not a good thing. And you can't grow as well. But if you do have lots of genes, it means that the genes that you have can take on new properties. They can do new things. And some of these might have allowed it to do things like, survive in such harsh conditions. We still don't know exactly, but this is the sort of first step on the clues. Another event that happened in the history of the genomes of these things is that even though it has all these genes, another sort of stress-induced event, meaning that, it must have been a particularly harsh, dry summer in this desert, which meant that a whole bunch of the genes stopped working. The result of that is that this thing can survive.
How disappointing, Sachandrika. I was hoping that the answer wouldn't be too many genes. I was hoping for some sort of oil of Olay extraction that could be injected into cosmetic products within the year so that we could all live longer.
I'm sorry, Ollie, what can I tell you? Get on TikTok, everyone, and keep you young. What's great about this new discovery that Alex mentioned is that it might have something to do with how we live in a world that is affected by climate change in the future. So if this plant, Welwitschia, has lived through what Tao Wan, a botanist from Shenzhen, China, has called extreme stress, so living in this desert, living in arid conditions, if this plant can live through that and have altered its genome to survive, then this can have an effect on how we genetically modify food to eat now and in the future, and to make sure that the world's population is fed.
But it is an outlier, though, isn't it, Kate? 3 weeks ago, a study from the University of California found that even hardy desert vegetation was no match for scorching temperatures recorded in the Sonoran Desert in Southern California. So this decline in vegetation, that is the very real concern for a very large portion of the world population, isn't it? So this story might give us hope, but it's marginal, really, compared to how every other species is unable to survive in those kinds of conditions.
Yeah, the study you mentioned, that was a 34-year satellite study by NASA of the desert in California, it did show that human-caused climate change is reducing the amount of vegetation in dry lands, which has really serious repercussions in terms of drought and water scarcity, which impacts, I think it's 40% of the world's population. 55 million people globally are affected by droughts each year. They're the most serious hazard to livestock and crops in nearly every part of the world. So yeah, it definitely is a big concern hearing that even the hardiest desert vegetation can't cope with these scorching temperatures.
I mean, I'm aware, Alok, that you always come to us with exciting science research, and then I'm always like, yeah, but how can I use this? But if I did find myself in an arid desert, could I eat it?
I don't think so, to be honest. I mean, I think that desert animals do chew on it to get some water. You can probably get some water out of it, but I don't think it would give you a huge amount of nutrition. Maybe some fiber, but not much else. But the thing is that this is a real outlier in how we understand how plants behave. And if we can unlock some of the secrets, genetic secrets as to how it does survive, those insights might be useful for many, many of the agricultural crops that we grow, whether it's, corn or grapes for wine or anything else. And so if we can spot varieties that have genetic properties that are a bit similar to the Welwitschia, you can either graft them into agricultural crops through genetic modification, or you find breeds that have similar genetic properties. Just to take one example of a big industry that's changing because of climate change. I mean, lots and lots of agricultural industry is changing. The wine industry is changing hugely. And if the world's average temperatures rose by 2 degrees Celsius, something like half of the current wine growing regions of the world would just stop growing grapes. Parts of southern France and Spain just couldn't anymore. And so what do? What you have to do is find new grapes or find new ways of growing those things. And things like Welwitschia can give you genetic and environmental clues on how to do that.
But I suppose the danger with that, Sachandrika, is that people think, oh, well, the scientists will sort it out. They've just discovered all about this plant and they'll be able to evolve our current industries so that we can carry on with our, carbon absorption and pollution and everything else, with our carbon production and pollution and everything else. But that isn't the way to resolve climate change, is it? Just wait for the scientists to get on it. It could take 1 million years to work out what's going on here.
Let's not stop the scientists.
I'm the only one suggesting that we stop them.
But, they can, and then how the systems we have in place right now implement them. We'll know the problem of systems being slow to change over is actually the same problem we had with the salary secrecy in the last story, isn't it? But let me give you an example of what could be quite a nice success story in terms of feeding a population who is looking at danger in the near future. So about 20% of the calories consumed across the world come from rice, but rice is grown in places that are at risk of flooding in the imminent future. So we're looking at India, Bangladesh and China. And Bangladesh in particular is often, at risk of flooding. It's a place where it's a place where the effects of climate change will be seen very quickly and very soon. So once the rice is submerged, it's useless, the crop is gone. So how do you deal with that? The fact that the rice needs a very delicate level in order to grow and remain edible. One solution to this is something which I love the sound of. It's called scuba rice. Kids will love that. Like, imagine feeding them scuba rice before going to Peppa Pig World. They will love it. And so that can withstand being soaked in floodwater, which is much more likely to happen again and again. And that's been grown successfully in Southeast Asia. So this is happening already. These GM crops are being grown. They are being successful. And there's one other kind that I just want to mention. So genetic modification can also help rectify problems that Mother Nature left in. So rice paddy fields are also a big contributor to the source of the greenhouse gas methane, which is one of life's horrible ironies. But the creation of the Susiba 2 variety of rice, that's Susiba2, I think that's how you say it, that contains a gene from the barley plant, and that helps reduce methane emissions. So you can actually come up with crops that help the situation that we're in right now.
And with that, I'm going to cut our life cycle slightly shorter than that of the Welwitschia, because that is it for this week. Kate, Sachandrika and Alok, thank you. And remember, you can follow this show for free. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts, and a brand new episode will be delivered to your smartphone each week forever and ever, in perpetuity, even if all around you are in a dead, arid desert. I've been Ollie Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Lauren Armstrong Carter at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.